In the quiet town of Tupelo, Mississippi, in the year 1963, a modest transaction took place that would quietly set in motion forces destined to reshape the landscape of American communication and entertainment. Ralph J. Roberts, a shrewd entrepreneur with a vision for the emerging medium of cable television, acquired a small system serving just 1,200 subscribers for $500,000. This was American Cable Systems, a fledgling operation in an industry still in its infancy, where coaxial cables promised to deliver clearer signals and more channels to homes long limited by over-the-air broadcasts. What began as a regional curiosity would, over decades, swell into an unstoppable tide, carrying with it the dreams of connectivity and the shadows of unchecked power. The early years unfolded with deliberate expansion. By 1969, the company relocated its headquarters to Philadelphia and reincorporated under a new name, Comcast Corporation, a blend evoking communications and broadcasting. This rebranding marked the first deliberate step toward national ambition. Under Roberts' guidance and later his son Brian, the firm pursued a strategy of calculated acquisitions, absorbing smaller operators across the Midwest and Northeast. Each purchase added subscribers, infrastructure, and market leverage, building a foundation that few could have foreseen as the bedrock of future dominance. As the 1970s dawned, cable television emerged from obscurity into the cultural mainstream. Premium channels like HBO arrived in 1972, offering uncut movies and exclusive programming that drew millions away from traditional networks. Comcast positioned itself adeptly within this shift, investing in regional systems and forging partnerships that expanded its reach. By the mid-1980s, aggressive moves propelled the company forward. In 1986, it secured a significant stake in Group W Cable, instantly boosting its subscriber base. 2 years later, the acquisition of Storer Communications further solidified its standing, elevating Comcast to one of the top players in a fragmented industry. The 1990s brought technological leaps that intertwined cable with the burgeoning internet. Comcast tested early digital cellular services and explored broadband delivery over its existing lines. In 1995, the purchase of EW Scripps' cable operations added millions more homes to its network. By 1999, the acquisition of Jones Intercable marked another milestone, extending tentacles deeper into urban and suburban markets. Revenues climbed steadily, fueled not just by television subscriptions, but by the promise of high-speed internet access, a service that telephone companies struggled to match with their aging DSL infrastructure. As the new millennium approached, Comcast's trajectory accelerated. In 2002, the landmark purchase of AT&T Broadband for $44 billion transformed the company overnight. This deal, the largest cable acquisition in history at the time, catapulted Comcast to the forefront, serving over 20 million subscribers and controlling vast swaths of the nation's cable infrastructure. The integration was seamless in ambition, if not always in execution, merging systems and branding under the emerging Xfinity umbrella, a name that would soon become synonymous with both innovation and frustration. Yet even in these years of ascent, subtle fissures appeared. Customer satisfaction surveys began to reflect growing discontent. The American Customer Satisfaction Index, tracking perception since the early 2000s, consistently placed cable providers at the bottom of all industries. Comcast, as the largest, bore the brunt of this scrutiny. Complaints accumulated: unreliable service during peak hours, lengthy installation waits, and bills that seemed to inflate unpredictably. These were early whispers of a deeper malaise where rapid growth outpaced investments in customer experience. The internet boom amplified these tensions. As households embraced streaming and online gaming, demand for bandwidth surged. Comcast responded with upgrades, rolling out DOCSIS standards that promised gigabit speeds. But alongside progress came policies that would ignite widespread resentment. Data caps emerged in select markets, limiting monthly usage before overage fees kicked in. Throttling practices, once used to manage congestion, drew accusations of violating emerging principles of net neutrality, the idea that all internet traffic should flow equally, without favoritism or restriction. In 2007, revelations surfaced that Comcast had been selectively slowing peer-to-peer file-sharing traffic, a technique exposed by independent tests. The backlash was swift. Consumer advocates decried it as interference with an open internet. The Federal Communications Commission investigated, issuing a cease and desist order that forced transparency in network management.
Though Comcast adjusted its methods, the episode lingered as a defining moment, planting seeds of distrust that would blossom into outright hostility. By the late 2000s, public sentiment crystallized. In 2010, the consumer advocacy site The Consumerist awarded Comcast its infamous Worst Company in America title, a bracket-style tournament reflecting reader votes. The company claimed the dubious honor again in 2014, edging out banks and airlines in a field of corporate villains. These accolades, though informal, captured a profound truth. In an era of expanding connectivity, millions felt trapped by a provider they could neither escape nor fully trust. The roots of this animosity ran deep into the structure of the industry itself. Cable franchises, granted by local governments, often created natural monopolies in specific regions. Where competition existed, it was limited. Satellite for television, perhaps, but rarely for high-speed broadband. Comcast's dominance in many markets meant consumers had few alternatives. Prices rose steadily, outpacing inflation, while
service interruptions and billing disputes became routine grievances. As the company entered the 2010s, its empire appeared unassailable. Yet, beneath the surface, pressures mounted. The shift toward cord-cutting accelerated, with streaming services like Netflix challenging traditional bundles. Comcast's response would define its next chapter, a bold pivot into content ownership, seeking to control not just the pipes, but the programming flowing through them. This ambition would culminate in one of the most consequential mergers in media history, binding distribution power with creative control in ways that would intensify scrutiny and fuel the narrative of unchecked corporate might. The story of Comcast is one of relentless progression, where humble beginnings gave way to colossal influence. From a single system in Mississippi to a national behemoth, the journey seemed inevitable, driven by strategic foresight and the inexorable demand for connection. But inevitability carries consequences. As the company grew, so did the chorus of voices questioning its practices, its pricing, and its grip on the essential arteries of modern life. What followed would expose the hidden costs of dominance, revealing a corporation that, in its pursuit of scale, became the focal point of America's deepest frustrations with corporate power. As the second decade of the new century unfolded, Comcast's ambitions reached a pivotal crossroads that would bind its distribution empire to the very heart of content creation. In 2009, whispers of a transformative deal began to circulate through the corridors of power in media and telecommunications. By December, Comcast announced its intention to acquire a controlling stake in NBC Universal from General Electric, a transaction valued at $30 billion that would grant it 51% ownership. This vertical integration promised to unite the pipes of delivery with the wellsprings of programming, encompassing the NBC broadcast network, cable channels like USA, MSNBC, and CNBC, alongside Universal Studios' vast film library and theme parks. Regulators scrutinized the proposal intensely, fearing the emergence of a gatekeeper capable of dictating terms across the evolving digital landscape. Approval came in January 2011, conditioned upon safeguards designed to preserve competition. Comcast committed to relinquishing management control over Hulu, ensuring programming availability to rivals, and adhering to principles that would later crystallize into broader open internet rules. The merger closed swiftly, rebranding the entity as NBC Universal and solidifying Comcast's hybrid identity as both carrier and creator. By 2013, Comcast exercised its option to purchase the remaining stake, achieving full ownership for an additional $16 billion. This consolidation amplified its leverage, allowing seamless promotion of NBC content across its platforms while integrating sports properties under a unified NBC Sports banner. Revenues surged, bolstered by synergies that blended advertising, subscriptions, and thematic experiences. Yet this ascent coincided with mounting evidence of practices that alienated the very subscribers fueling the growth. Billing structures grew increasingly opaque, with advertised rates often eclipsed by surcharges that materialized only upon receipt of the monthly statement. Broadcast TV fees and regional sports surcharges, introduced as mechanisms to offset programming costs, escalated rapidly, sometimes increasing by thousands of % over short periods. Customers discovered packages promoted at modest prices
ballooned with compulsory add-ons for equipment, installation, and regulatory recovery. Complaints poured into forums and regulatory bodies, detailing bills stuffed with unauthorized services or fees misrepresented as government mandated. In Washington state, investigations revealed systematic additions of a service protection plan without explicit consent, prompting a landmark ruling in 2019 that found Comcast in violation of consumer protection laws nearly 500,000 times. Internal records exposed agents incentivized to upsell, often omitting full disclosures of recurring charges. Similar patterns emerged elsewhere, with class actions alleging deceptive advertising that lured subscribers with low introductory rates only to impose escalating junk fees. Overage charges for data usage, equipment rentals, and activation costs compounded the frustration, transforming predictable expenses into unpredictable burdens. The industry's franchise model, rooted in local grants that frequently bestowed exclusive rights, insulated Comcast from meaningful rivalry in vast territories. Where alternatives existed, they often lagged in speed or reliability, leaving households captive to a single, high-speed provider. This structural dominance enabled steady price elevations, outpacing inflation, even as satisfaction metrics plummeted. The American Customer Satisfaction Index repeatedly ranked cable and internet providers at the nadir of all sectors, with Comcast emblematic of the discontent. Informal polls amplified the sentiment, culminating in 2010 and again in 2014, when reader-driven tournaments crowned it the worst company in America, a title commemorated with symbolic disdain. Viral incidents crystallized the brewing resentment. Recordings of service calls captured representatives resisting cancellations with relentless interrogation, transforming routine disconnections into protracted battles. One such exchange, lasting 18 minutes of recorded persistence, spread rapidly across digital networks, drawing millions of views and igniting widespread empathy among those who had endured similar ordeals. Bills arriving addressed in derogatory terms after disputes further fueled outrage, highlighting a perceived indifference to individual grievances. Technicians' errors, from disabling neighboring services to invasive installations, added layers of real-world disruption. Network management practices drew parallel scrutiny. Revelations of selective throttling in earlier years lingered, evolving into debates over data allowances that penalized heavy users with overage penalties. Exemptions for affiliated streaming services raised accusations of favoritism, circumventing the spirit of equitable access. As households increasingly relied on broadband for work, education, and entertainment, these restrictions felt less like congestion mitigation and more like profit extraction from essential infrastructure. Comcast's boldest gambit came in 2014 with the announcement of a $45 billion bid for Time Warner Cable, a merger that would consolidate the nation's two largest providers into a colossus serving nearly 60% of broadband households. Proponents argued efficiencies and innovation, but opponents decried the concentration of power over the conduits of information. Public outcry swelled, amplified by accumulating tales of service failures and opaque pricing. Regulators, attuned to shifting dynamics in video delivery and broadband dependency, signaled deepening concerns. By April 2015, facing imminent opposition from justice officials and communications authorities, Comcast withdrew, marking a rare rebuke to its expansionist trajectory. The failed union underscored vulnerabilities in unchecked scale. While synergies with NBC Universal fortified content defenses against cord-cutting trends, distribution grievances persisted unabated. Streaming rivals gained ground, unencumbered by legacy bundles or regional monopolies. Comcast responded with investments in infrastructure and customer initiatives, yet the undercurrents of distrust flowed stronger. Hidden levies and perceived monopolistic leverage had woven a narrative of exploitation, where connectivity, once a promise of empowerment, increasingly resembled a toll exacted without escape. This era revealed the double-edged nature of dominance. Vertical command over creation and carriage offered strategic depth, but it also magnified scrutiny and resentment.
As data demands exploded and alternatives flickered on the horizon, the company's practices came under relentless examination. The path forward demanded not merely technological upgrades, but a reckoning with the human cost of its ascent. What emerged next would test whether reform could temper the forces that had propelled Comcast to unparalleled heights, or if the weight of accumulated discontent would reshape the empire from within. The tide of discontent swelled inexorably through the 2020s, as Comcast's practices faced unrelenting exposure in an age of digital amplification and heightened consumer awareness. Data caps, long a source of irritation, persisted as a mechanism to extract additional revenue from households increasingly dependent on broadband for every facet of daily life. The standard allowance hovered at 1.2 terabytes monthly, a threshold that seemed ample in earlier years, but grew constricting amid surging demands for high-definition streaming, remote work, and cloud storage. Exceeding this limit triggered overage fees of $10 per 50 gigabytes, capped at $100, transforming routine usage into a gamble that favored the house. Complaints proliferated across forums and social platforms, detailing sudden spikes in reported data that defied household patterns. Customers recounted meticulous tracking yielding discrepancies, with internal measurements falling far short of Comcast's tallies. Accusations of inflated metering surfaced repeatedly, fueling suspicions that the system encouraged upgrades to unlimited plans at premium rates. In markets where alternatives remained scarce, these restrictions felt less like prudent management and more like leverage over captive audiences. Even as bandwidth needs exploded, the caps endured, drawing parallels to tolls on essential roadways. Billing opacity reached new heights of frustration. Advertised rates lured subscribers with promises of affordability, only for statements to reveal layers of add-ons. Broadcast television surcharges climbing steadily, regional sports fees escalating without warning, modem rentals imposed even on those supplying their own equipment. Modem rental charges, often $15 monthly, persisted erroneously on accounts long after customers purchased compatible devices, generating billions in aggregate revenue. Unauthorized additions appeared, from protection plans to extraneous lines, prompting investigations and settlements that affirmed patterns of deception. In Washington, a court affirmed nearly 500,000 violations of consumer protection statutes tied to unsolicited service plans. Similar actions in Minnesota and Massachusetts yielded refunds and debt forgiveness for tens of thousands, acknowledging misrepresentations that padded profits at subscriber expense. Yet these resolutions felt incremental against the broader canvas of systemic grievances. Prices ascended relentlessly, outstripping inflation, while satisfaction indices languished at historic lows. The American Customer Satisfaction Index chronicled cable and internet providers at the bottom of all sectors, with Comcast emblematic of the malaise. Competition, long touted as a counterbalance, proved elusive in vast territories. Franchise agreements and infrastructure barriers preserved regional strongholds, where high-speed alternatives arrived sporadically or not at all. Fixed wireless and fiber expansions chipped at edges, but in core markets, dominance enabled pricing power unchallenged by rivals. Broadband subscriber losses mounted quarter by quarter, accelerating in 2025 as bundled offerings from mobile carriers siphoned households weary of unpredictability. Executives conceded internally that opaque pricing and frequent adjustments eroded loyalty, acknowledging a marketplace no longer forgiving of such
dynamics. Viral episodes, though less explosive than prior decades, underscored enduring perceptions of indifference. Recordings of protracted cancellations resurfaced echoes of past scandals, while disputes over disputed charges escalated into public spectacles. Outages disrupted livelihoods, amplifying vulnerabilities in an era where connectivity underpinned employment and education. Data breaches compounded distrust, exposing millions to risks that demanded vigilance against phishing and identity threats. The 2023 incident, exploiting vulnerabilities to harvest personal details, lingered as a reminder of safeguards lagging behind scale. Amid these pressures, Comcast pivoted toward streaming fortifications. Peacock, launched in 2020, evolved from modest beginnings into a contender, buoyed by exclusive sports and library depth. Integration with Xfinity platforms deepened, bundling the service into packages that retained video subscribers amid cord-cutting currents. Live events, from Olympics to wrestling spectacles, drove surges in engagement, momentarily eclipsing grievances. Yet Peacock's trajectory intertwined with broader challenges. Subscriber growth demanded heavy investments, while profitability remained elusive against entrenched rivals. By mid-decade, concessions emerged in response to hemorrhaging lines. Data caps vanished from new national plans, replaced by unlimited tiers packaged with price guarantees spanning years. 5-year locks promised stability, acknowledging the churn fueled by volatility. Bundles incorporated rival streamers, weaving Netflix and Apple TV Plus into offerings that sought to stem defections. These shifts reflected not benevolence, but necessity, as fixed wireless and fiber inroads threatened entrenched positions. Executives framed reforms as marketplace responsiveness, yet critics viewed them as belated defenses against erosion. The monopoly narrative intensified, with analyses highlighting concentrations where choice remained illusory. In numerous locales, Comcast reigned as the sole provider of robust speeds, insulating it from pressures that disciplined other industries. Regulatory scrutiny waxed and waned, with proposals for transparency in billing and caps meeting resistance. Junk fees, decried nationally, persisted as line items that obscured true costs, inviting comparisons to tactics curbed elsewhere. As 2025 unfolded, subscriber declines sharpened focus on retention, revealing cracks in a foundation once deemed impregnable. This period marked a reckoning, where accumulated practices collided with evolving expectations. Vertical ownership of content offered buffers, channeling programming through controlled conduits, but distribution grievances undermined synergies. Peacock's ascent provided counterweights, drawing eyes to curated experiences amid fragmentation. Yet the undercurrents persisted: hidden levies, restrictive policies, indifferent resolutions. The empire, vast and multifaceted, navigated turbulence, born of its own momentum, where growth's fruits soured into widespread alienation. The path ahead loomed uncertain, shaped by technological shifts and competitive incursions. Fiber deployments accelerated, mobile alternatives matured, promising to redraw boundaries long taken for granted. Comcast's adaptations, from unlimited data to bundled streaming, signaled awareness of shifting sands. But trust, eroded over decades, proved harder to rebuild than infrastructure. The narrative of dominance carried forward, now tempered by forces that rendered inevitability less assured. What emerged next would determine whether reform could outpace resentment, or if the weight of legacy practices would hasten transformation imposed from without. If this documentary resonated with you, be sure to subscribe, like, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Your engagement helps support independent documentaries and keeps important conversations going.